Good to be back with you today to share in this time of worship on Pentecost Sunday. I got back in town Monday night and hit the office on Tuesday and had to hit it running, as you can imagine. There's a bunch of stuff going on with the prayer summit this weekend and just a whole bunch of stuff. And well, frankly, I didn't have time to write a sermon this week. And I apologize. I know that that's something that you expect of me as your pastor to come and bring a message, but I just didn't have time. So sorry. And now that my Aunt Sophia is gone, she's been gone for a couple of years. I can't expect a letter from her anymore. Any new letters? The post office doesn't work from there to here, as you might imagine, but I did happen to find a letter that she wrote to me a few years ago, back in 2017, on this subject of Pentecost. And so I'd like to share that one with you, if that's okay. She writes such a good letter and such a wonderful way of expressing things. So this is my late Aunt Sophia writing a letter to me. Dear nephew, it has been so long since I last wrote to you that I wanted to get something off today before I get busy again and let it slide. You have been on my mind a lot lately, as has your family. I hear that your parents' house has sold and that you and your sisters are finally coming to the end of the process of dispersing their estate. So I know that it will be a load off your minds. I just also know that the finality of it all will probably hit you like a ton of bricks. Losing people you are close to is never easy. It is coming up on 2 years ago, now 8 years ago, that your mother died, and 6 months later that your father also died. How many times have we seen that happen? One spouse dies, and within a year, the other one dies as well. So much of our lives are wrapped up in relationships, especially the very close ones, that it is difficult to understand why loving spouses follow each other so closely. It isn't difficult to understand why loving spouses follow each other so closely into the next life. After your Uncle Justice died, I confess that I lost something of my will to live. If it hadn't been for Theo, whom I met a year after Justice died, I may have just shriveled up and died myself. My friend Matilda was like that. She and I went to high school together in the olden days and remained friends into our adult years. She married her high school sweetheart, Fred, when she was 20, and they remained happily married for 48 years. I still remember their wedding day and the inevitable first dance they had. Of course, the song was Waltzing Matilda, even though neither one of them were Australian. Well, they were married 48 years when Fred suddenly died of an aggressive cancer. Maddie was grief-stricken, of course, and we all tried to comfort her, but her health deteriorated until she died 7 months later. I don't remember the medical reason for her death, but we all knew it was grief that killed her. Human emotions are very powerful. As you well know, I think of the disciples of Jesus and how their emotions must have gone crazy when it happened to the one they had hoped would save Israel. What would save Israel was going to instead be chewed up and spat out by the powers that be in Israel, especially Peter, good old Peter. Now there's a study in emotional instability. Peter was fine as long as things were going well for he and Jesus' followers, but as soon as things started to get a little challenging, Peter demonstrated the full spectrum of human emotions that we all encounter in our lives. When Jesus explained to his disciples that he would be arrested in Jerusalem, that he would suffer and die, but that he would be raised from the dead, Peter objected and even rebuked Jesus. Listen to Matthew 16, verses 21 through 23. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." This same Peter, whom Jesus had just a few verses earlier called the rock, on which I will build my church, that's Matthew 16, verse 18, quite a flip-flop. But Peter was human, and he had very human emotions. He hadn't realized who Jesus was, even though he had confessed to knowing. Sounds to me like a lot of church people I've known over the years who said the words, confessed the faith, but inwardly were really not that converted. Peter had walked with Jesus for almost 3 years at this point. To be fair, all of the disciples were a bit slow in recognizing what Jesus was up to. But Peter modeled this slowness better than anyone. His thinking was all in human or natural terms, but Jesus was about divine or supernatural business. Then there's Peter after Jesus was arrested. He follows Jesus to the high priest's house, but lurks in the shadows, hiding from the truth that he was a follower of Jesus. Even when confronted, he denied knowing Jesus. Here's Luke 22, verses 54 through 62. Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance. When they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him in the firelight, stared at him and said, "This man also was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." A little later, someone else, on seeing him, said, "You are one of them." Peter said, "Man, I am not." Then, about an hour later, still another kept insisting, "Surely this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And at that moment, while he was still speaking, the cock crowed. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. This, after Peter had proclaimed to Jesus in Luke 22, verse 33, that he was ready to go with you to prison and to death. Fear had captured Peter's heart, and fear is the very human emotion. He was afraid that the consequences of admitting to following Jesus would be the same consequences that Jesus faced. And the strange thing about it was, he was right. Jesus himself said as much. Fear is a debilitating thing, and it can cause us to do or not to do a lot of things. For Peter, it caused him to lose his bravado and become paralyzed emotionally. When we operate out of fear, we cannot be used of God to transform the world, because we will constantly react to things fearfully and will never venture forth from our own safety zones in order to engage the world with the gospel. Instead, we will huddle together and wait for the world to come to us. Unfortunately, that is a description of many, many churches nowadays, and it is why they are dying. Had nothing happened, I am convinced that the church would have died shortly after Jesus did, like Maddie did after Fred did, or like your dad did after your mom did. But thank God, something happened. In fact, 2 things happened. First, of course, Jesus didn't stay dead. He rose from the grave and walked among his followers again. He ascended into heaven and sat down at the right hand of God the Father, never to die again. But that wasn't all, and perhaps for Peter and for the church, what happened next sealed the deal. And you heard the story as Nancy read from the 2nd chapter of Acts. I won't read it again. This is the same Peter who had no clue what God was doing in Jesus and who denied even knowing Jesus when push came to shove. What had happened? Pentecost had happened. It was the same Peter, but it was a fundamentally changed Peter, a transformed Peter, A Peter who no longer thought only in human terms and who was no longer ruled by fear. A Peter who was filled with the power of God through the infilling of the Holy Spirit, who not only could speak with boldness, but did so to the very people he had earlier feared. And he was able to interpret for them what God was up to. Peter is not only the rock upon which Jesus' church was founded, Peter is the church, allegorically. Peter, before Pentecost, is just like the church in many cases. And what Peter needed to come out of his humanistic, fearful, faithless shell is exactly what the church needs to become what it was intended to be from the very beginning. The church needs Pentecost. The church needs the infilling of the Holy Spirit. And if the church is ever to get that infilling, the individuals in the church will need to get it too. We need a personal and collective Pentecost. But here I go, preaching to the choir again. I know you already know this stuff and that you have yourself gone through a Pentecost of your own a few years back. It reminds me when your late Uncle Justice would mow the lawn at our house. At first, he used one of those manual, unpowered push mowers that use the turning of the wheels to operate the blades to cut the grass. It got the job done, but it was awfully hard work, and Justice would come back in the house sweating and panting for water. Then he bought a powered motor, and it was like night and day. The church can do much of the work that the church does under its own power, things like potlucks and meetings, but when it comes to world-transforming things and people-transforming things, it lacks the power to get it done, unless and until the Holy Spirit comes and fills it with divine power. Much of what the church really should be doing gets left on the brainstorming newsprint, never seeing the light of day and never becoming a reality. Pentecost changed all of that, or at least it should have. So anyway, there you have it, my 2 cents for now. Please keep us in your prayers. Theo is still finding it hard to get out and about, and I'm starting to lose my finely toned athlete's body. We're doing okay, but can always use more prayer. Say hello to your beautiful wife, Cindy, and your strapping young man, Nathan. Give them hugs from us, and tell Jessica and Sam, your other kids, that we are praying for them. It's been so long since we were all together. We should plan something before it's too late. Write when you get a chance. Always love hearing from you. Love, Aunt Sophia. The irony is, well, there's lots of irony there, but the one I want to lift up is that our 7th grandchild, to be born this summer in July, is going to be named Sophia. So it comes full circle. Sophia, by the way, means wisdom. It's a Greek name. Well, let's spend a few moments in prayerful reflection as we consider what God may be speaking to our hearts today.